Told you about pro-Palestinian protests on college and university campuses across the country.
That includes the University of Washington Seattle campus, where an encampment has taken over the quad as protesters call for the university to divest itself of ties to Boeing and Israel. We have this morning with us Congressman Adam Smith. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us to chat about this.
Thanks for giving me the chance.
Absolutely. So when it comes to the encampment at UW, one of the KOMO crews says the area isn't accessible unless campers allow it, despite this being a public property. So do you think these encampments on these campuses are crossing the line?
Well, here's the problem, and you know, it's difficult in these settings for people to hold two thoughts in their head at the same time, but I think it's necessary. Thought number one is, look, protesting is an incredibly important part of a representative democracy. People have a right to speak out in a variety of different manners, and they have a right to be creative about how they try to get people's attention. I totally agree with that. On the other hand, they don't have a right to silence and intimidate other people, which is why throughout the history of our country, you know, what is it, time, manner, and place are a factor in whether or not free speech is acceptable. Look, there is no question that across the country, a number of these protesters have crossed the line. No doubt about it. They have intimidated people, blocked people from entering places, they've vandalized property. But there's also no question that a large number of these protesters are exercising an absolute right. So you got to balance that. And I think, you know, university presidents, anybody in any space who's trying to deal with, that's what they're trying to do, to allow people to protest in a sensible way. But to answer your question, no. Protesters should not be allowed to occupy a public space and then block other people who come in. I heard a story, one of these campuses said you wouldn't be allowed to walk into this place unless basically you agreed with everything they were saying. And I don't think that's okay. I don't think that is an appropriate way to protest. So, you know, some of the protests are good, some of them are bad, and I think we have to be, you know, discerning enough to identify which is which.
Congressman, we know that one thing that UW has said about all this on their campus is it's not going to cut ties to Boeing and Israel, despite, you know, demands that are being made from the protesters. What's your response to that when you hear that pro-Palestinian protesters are calling for that action from the university?
Well, actually, I'll go back to something you were talking about in your previous segment, this effort to block celebrities on social media because, you know, they could make a difference on this issue and they're choosing not to. This is where the line gets crossed, to my mind, where the only acceptable opinion to have is one where you agree with them. You know, they sort of presuppose that they are absolutely right about everything, so therefore nobody should be allowed to speak out or, frankly, you know, talk about anything unless they agree with them. And I'll give you just one example. Look, we want a ceasefire in Gaza, and that's one of the biggest things these folks are advocating for. You know, there's been a ceasefire on the table for about 4 months now that President Biden and his administration have helped negotiate, that Hamas has turned down because they're refusing to release the hostages and they're insisting upon a permanent ceasefire. So if you want a ceasefire in Gaza, part of what you need to do is to also put pressure on Hamas. So in all of this, there's just this presupposed assumption that the protesters are absolutely right about everything. And no, I don't think the University of Washington should cut off Boeing or cut off Israel. I think both of those issues are vastly more complicated than they are being portrayed by some of the protesters. And I think in a healthy democracy, you have that discussion. You have that debate. You don't silence the debate. You can be confident enough in your own opinion that if you push the issue and you welcome the debate, that you'll win that argument. And I think in many cases, the protesters are making it clear that they don't have that confidence because they don't want to allow anyone who disagrees with them to speak. And I think that is wrong.
We've got to explore all viewpoints for sure. Rep. Smith, I want to touch on something you just mentioned, the possibility of a ceasefire. We know last week Israeli troops seized control of Gaza's Rafah border crossing, and there's still concerns of a full-scale invasion. President Biden saying he will pause more offensive military assistance to Israel if it goes through with the operation. So do you still stand on a ceasefire happening? Do you support that? Do you support the president's decision?
Well, I support what the president has been doing to try to get a ceasefire. And look, and the president, as you know, was in town this week. I went to one of the events. You know, the first thing he said is if Hamas would release the hostages, there's a pretty decent chance that this war would end. And we can't lose track of that aspect of this. The hostages should not be forgotten about in all of this. So I believe that. But I also agree with the president that while Israel certainly has a right to defend itself against Hamas, and while Hamas needs to be removed as the governing body in Gaza, you have to have an alternative. And if Israel is going into a place like Rafah without any concern for the civilian population or what the alternative is, that's a problem. So I think the president is correct in putting pressure on Israel to not do that. And right now, the only weapons he's restricted are 2,000-pound non-precision guided weapons that should not be used in a campaign like Rafah under any circumstances. So in that sense, yes, I support the president. But as I've alluded to throughout this conversation, getting to a reasonable, peaceful solution in Gaza is vastly more complicated than it is usually portrayed.
Is the president doing enough to put pressure on the situation there to find a solution to all this, though, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think he's doing everything he can. Look, there's sort of this people tend to presuppose that somehow the president has to be able to fix a problem. And if he hasn't fixed a problem, then therefore that means he isn't doing enough. That sort of forgets all the other actors that are involved here. That forgets Hamas and Israel. Look, the president is trying to navigate a very, very difficult situation that, frankly, nobody has been able to successfully navigate for going on 75 years now. But he's trying to get to a more peaceful outcome, and he's using the levers that he has to try to get there. So, yeah, I think he has definitely been focused on this. Senior members of the administration, the CIA director, the Secretary of State, the National Security Advisor, have been sent to the region to work with anyone that they can work with, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, to try to get an agreement. Yes, I think the president has prioritized this and is doing everything he can.
Congressman, before we let you go, I want to switch gears here. Let's talk about locally what's happening here at home. What would you say right now are your #1 priorities in your district, and what are you currently working on to address those things?
Affordable housing. Number one, without question. Now look, we have a number of different challenges in this region. I typically list them as behavioral health issues around drug and mental health issues, homelessness, crime, workforce development, people being able to find jobs. But all of those are impacted by the incredibly high cost of housing and the economic pressure that puts on people in my district and in this region. So we have driven out dollars to support a variety of different affordable housing projects. I'm working on a bunch of different issues to try to build more housing, make that more cost effective. So I think we need to do that. Now, I also think that, crime, drug abuse, huge problems. And I want to find the right balance between accountability and personal responsibility and also helping people, getting at the root causes of those things. And one of my great frustrations in this region is everyone wants to talk about the root causes, or everyone wants to talk about how, well, the individual is responsible for it. Well, it's both. And we have to find that balance in terms of putting people in a position to succeed, setting expectations for them, and holding them accountable to get there. But again, I'll come back to where I started. Affordable housing. I actually have a bill to block hedge funds from buying up starter homes, which is happening increasingly, which is yet another factor that is making it more difficult for people to buy housing. And like I said, I've supported driving dollars out to a variety of different affordable housing projects throughout the region. Housing. It is the biggest challenge that we face in the region. And as I said, it impacts all of those other challenges that we have.
It certainly does. And we know that you're a busy man. Congressman Adam Smith, thank you for joining us this morning, and apologies for the misidentification before the last commercial break. Appreciate your time.
Not the first time that's happened between Rick and I. At this point, we're used to it, so yes. Not a problem.
I've heard that happen before. Thank you for your time. Still ahead, a new generation of chess players hope to break a decades-long streak.
We talk with the Grandmaster about the future of chess in America and how you can get involved. We're back after this.
Seattle Refined. Adventure awaits. Today at 4. I remember like it was yesterday. The open sea, the views, the adventure. The memories of our trip to Victoria will always be with me. Now we get to do it all over again.
Visit ferrytovictoria.com.
I'm Dave Portite, and I'm asking for your help.